Oh, that's way too dark. There we go. That's a little better. How's it going, my friends? I guess it wasn't as bright as I thought it would be. Welcome to 15-Minute Free Thinking with me, Carpo. And today I'm going to talk about something that I think is extremely important and something that I haven't discussed before. Now, mind you, it is midnight where I'm at. It's late at night. My mind has been running lately. Not about the subject here, but about other things. I got back earlier from digging through a dumpster at my son's school, pulling out all of the blocks and various school supplies that they threw away. It was amazing the stuff we pulled out. It's been like 3 rounds we've done this, but the point being that the amount of waste that our society creates, I mean, we can put in a little effort to try to help that, change it, and I think that's important, but we've kind of doomed ourselves. We are trapped with our own garbage. And this is one small problem in a much bigger issue that we have, which is that eventually we are going to not run out of resources, but run out of enough resources to where it's going to be difficult for us to live the lives that we live now. And I'm very open-minded. As a liberal person, I still listen to people who are even conservatives or Christians. And I ran into this guy the other day. It was the Warrior Poets Society. That was the name of the channel. Maybe I'll put the @ symbol and, give the shout out to the channel. But the point being that I agreed with almost everything the guy said, but he was talking about specifically this thing. He said it was like a 4-part video. I don't recall what it was called, but he said that we all live like kings, and it was the first time I've heard somebody else say this. I mean, I've thought about this for years. I've said, for all the people who complain about society and the way that we live right now and how we're so poor and so many people are suffering, this is all true. But for the most part, as Americans, most of us live better than the kings did 500 years ago. As he mentioned, all the things, like they shit into the holes in the castles. If it was cold out, they got cold. If it was hot out, they got hot. There was no air conditioning. There was no central heating. They had a fireplace they could sit in front of. They could eat the meat or the vegetables that were in season. Today, we can freaking eat anything we want. I mean, we are basically... You put a crown on us and we're sitting on our couch watching Netflix, eating hot dogs or KFC, whatever it might be. And I'm not speaking for any of you. I personally don't eat hot dogs very often, and I definitely don't eat KFC. But we live in a time where we really take for granted what we have. We have become the spoiled generation, but I'm Gen X, Gen Z, all these other Gen Y, whatever you want to name them, it's all just labels. The point being, the current generation has had it pretty easy. And I get the feeling that something's going to go down eventually where people are not going to have it so easy. And that's why I'm going to talk for a moment about preparing for any potential disaster, apocalypse, whatever it might be. I know that people don't want to acknowledge the fact that we are kind of at the pinnacle or the precipice of our current society. In my opinion, we have reached maximum, yield, if you will. And that from here on out, we are going to go downhill. And that's only going to be proven by the fact that eventually we're going to annihilate enough of our oceans to where we won't have the fish we need. We won't have, therefore, the fish that feed on those fish. We are killing the plankton by pollution. Global warming, whether it's from us or not, doesn't matter. It still kills parts of the ocean, coral reefs. We are seeing desertification, huge fires, and western droughts right now. So, yeah, it might all go back to normal, like some beautiful dream. But for those who are paying attention, who have expected this, I'd like to label out the things that I think people might need for a disaster. And I'm not new to this. It's funny because when I started my YouTube channel, if you go to my video list and you actually put it in chronological order of when I started my channel, I have a whole series on prepping. And back then I was fascinated with getting prepared, having everything you need. And I still have, 10 years later, the same buckets of dry food that I had then, which have a 20 to 30 year shelf life, and they probably last longer. But as for the basics, I mean, everybody knows you might need some canned food, you might need some water. Water is extremely important. I live in the Pacific Northwest. Fortunately, we have water available in many places here. I don't worry as much as some might about having water or access to it. But in the water note here, having a filter is extremely important. And what I mean by that is you can buy several different types of Brita filters, sure. But I mean buying activated carbon or being able to utilize sand, learning how to make your own filter. Because if you do, you can have rain barrels and you can collect runoff from your roof, even if it's off an asphalt shingle roof. Sure, there's pollutants in the water, but if you have the proper filter and it's an emergency, you can have endless water supply. But that's assuming you have water. If you live in a desert, you might want to, prepare otherwise. Dig a well if you can, but often that's not an option. So water is crucial, obviously, but filters are important. Rain barrels can be very useful. PVC pipes for diverting the water is extremely useful. 5-gallon buckets that you can get at Home Depot for like $3. We take all this stuff for granted because they're available. 15-gallon tubs that you see for $5 on sale. All of these things can help us preserve water, store food, and I know a lot of folks don't realize we live in a just-in-time society, or JIT, but that means that all the food comes in basically that day. The food that we need arrives that day to the store, and they might have a 48-hour supply of food. In a rush on the store, they might have a 10-hour supply of food or a 5-hour supply of food. I'd like to say that once the shit hits the fan, we see what happens. If people think toilet paper is a commodity, there you go. A couple of other things you might want to have. Canning jars. Something that's often overlooked. And that's kind of what I'm here to do, is point out the things that are overlooked. There are a lot of guys out there, the tough guys. Oh, I've got 10 AKs and I've got all of these, all of this home defense weaponry, and I've got my flak jacket and everything else. That's great. But you only have 2 hands. The fact is, any guy who truly gets this understands that you might need a rifle, a pistol, whatever it might be. One of each, right? Maybe a couple extras for backup. But being obsessed with different weaponry is not going to help you in a situation where you need food. Sure, you can go out and hunt deer, right? Or take someone else's food, right? But obviously, most people are just thinking they're going to protect themselves, and that's commendable and understandable. I will understand the need to protect yourself, but I'm not going to talk about that here. My point being that only because YouTube doesn't like talking about firearms, things like that. Canning jars, as I said. Seeds is a huge one that I never hear anybody talk about. And I have a can of seeds that's sealed. It's supposed to have like a 10-year shelf life. I actually took one can and tested it like 8 years after I bought it. All the seeds germinated. As long as they're vacuum sealed, you can do really well. And they're all in Mylar packaging, and they're all in cold climate on a concrete floor in a garage. So having seeds could help you grow a garden. All you need is enough to grow just 1 year, as long as you can harvest those. Don't buy Terminator seeds or some Monsanto shit. You want to buy heirloom seed packets. You can buy from Victory Seeds, and I know I do not sponsor them. They're not sponsored by me, but the last time I bought from them, their seeds were good. But besides having seeds, learning to grow your food during these times when you still can, during the times when you're able to grow a garden, learn how to grow food. Learn how to protect yourself by having a food supply. I really try every year to grow new foods I haven't grown before, just in case, if things go bad, at least I'll know I can grow some stuff and feed myself. I know a lot of folks think you just plant seeds in the ground and they just grow food for you, but no, it doesn't work that way. It takes a little bit of work. Two things that I'd like to point out is over-the-counter prescriptions, or under-the-counter, or rather, prescriptions and over-the-counter medication. Sorry. Go out and buy some Advil, a huge bottle, or whatever brand, generics, it doesn't matter. Buy some ibuprofen, buy some acetaminophen. These things are relatively cheap, and if you keep them, as long as there's something you use, you don't have to buy a lot at a time. But if you sense something going down, definitely have these. They can be very useful in an emergency. Prescription medication goes without saying. It's one of the top things that most preppers talk about. If you take a prescription for heart disease, some sort of medication for blood pressure, if you have diabetes, get as much as you can and stock up ahead of time. If your doctor will allow you to get more prescriptions than you need, you should get as many as you can get at all times. Never rely on the system. It's crucial to remember that. And on that note, don't rely on the banks to be able to get your money out. Keep cash on hand. Keep some silver around. It's important to remember that if the banks crash, if something happens where there's an EMP, where there's no access, where the internet goes down, where there's a hacking attack, you can't get to your money. And I hate to say it, but the same goes for cryptocurrency. I look at that as like a stock. It's like a risk. Cash may be worthless as well, but at least in the short run, you'll be able to go out and get some stuff from the store. You'll be able to go to a local grocer or buy something from a neighbor who may think that things will get back to normal eventually. In other words, cash may be worthless, but if you offer somebody $100 for a bag of potatoes, they'll probably take it in the short run, thinking, oh, cool, I can use this when things get back to normal. You have to be smart enough to know when things aren't going to get back to normal, and that's hard to know. But in the short run, if it's worth it to you and it's worth it to them, having cash or silver is great. Having seeds to barter long term might be better. On the next list, cash, silver trades, all that stuff. On the next one, tarps and plastic sheeting. Those have a variety of uses. You can use them to sleep under. You can use them to store things, to protect things, to keep them dry. You can use them to keep in heat or keep out the cold or the frost. You can also use them for, it's endless, the amount of stuff you can use plastic and tarps for. We just really don't realize how useful these things are until we can't go down and buy a bunch of sheeting. You could build an entire room out of 3 mil or 4 mil plastic. I mean, the stuff is amazing. So get a bunch of that. And firewood, fire starters, depends on if you have a fireplace. But even if you don't, if you have a house or you live anywhere, having a backyard or even a place to have a fire could be useful short term. Not a lot of people have fireplaces anymore, but we do. And glow sticks are good too. On the next list, I have propane, gas stoves. And this one seems pretty obvious. But about 10 years ago, when I was in my prepping phase, I went down and bought a propane tank from my neighbor, a mile away or something. It was on Craigslist. He was selling a 50-gallon propane tank, one of the like 5-footers, for I think like $40, and it came full of propane. And so I was like, I'll take that. I carried that awkward thing home in my van and put it in my shed, and I've had it there ever since. Has one of the old valves on it. I don't even care. The point being that I got it because in an emergency, having propane and a propane stove to cook your food can be the difference between like comfort and death, right? So, propane gas stoves, flashlights seem very obvious, but not a lot of people really think this through. You need batteries for these things too. And I'm a big fan of rechargeables, but you can't recharge in a major disaster. I would have solar panels. It's so important to my life. I think having solar panels is awesome. God, you can't foresee what might happen, right? Let's say there's a major disaster where there's a asteroid strike, right? I know it sounds absurd, but if the clouds are blocked out for a while, you might not have solar power, right? They make little hydroelectric wheels that you can buy that will, turn water into power, but then you have to have water. All of this is tricky, and it really depends on where you live. But solar panels and the proper batteries can be very useful, extremely useful. And I have them on my school bus, and I love them. Ham radio, even a portable one, so you can listen to what's going on, just in case the major channels go out. And a CB radio, I know it sounds absurd, but CBs are still useful. I have this one up there. It's a like a Pace, CB base, and it's right now I don't have the right power cord for it, but in my mind, it doesn't matter. In an emergency, I would figure out a way to make it work. I'd get my generator and I'd wire it in figure out a way to make it work. And that's the thing, having the tools you can make work. One kind of obscure thing is night vision goggles. Not everybody is going to get night vision goggles, that's obvious, but being able to see things, whether you're hunting or fishing or protecting your property, that could be the difference between life and death in some situations. But they're not that expensive. I'd like to say before I go, besides night vision and fishing gear, one thing I didn't mention, I should mention right now, is bug out bags. A lot of people talk about bug out bags being prepared to just on the go, right? A small bag full of the basics. And then I've heard people say that they don't really believe in bug out bags. And to me, I think it really depends on where you live. If you live in the city, I would definitely have a bug out bag ready, which is just your basic needs, your papers, things like that, or at least know where they are and be able to load them up in a hurry and go within, say, 10 minutes. Be able to load your shit up and get the hell out. But not everybody's going to be able to do that, and sometimes you might have to get papers from the safe or something to the bag. Nobody's going to want to have a backpack with all their private information in it all the time by the door. But being aware of that, I think, is important. And if that's an option, the closer you live to the city, the more important it would be to have a bug out bag, in my opinion. That's just me, though. But if you live in the country and you're likely to get a fire, that could be necessary too. You're going to have to look at your own situation. But gasoline, if you can get a bunch of gasoline, that might be a good thing too. I mentioned propane. I'd like to throw that in there. Oil, cooking oil and mechanical oil, for your needs for cooking, as well as any machinery or your automobile. I know this sounds silly, but these are things that we take for granted every day. I said in the beginning, the guy said, like, we're little kings. Completely agree. If you live in a place where you might have a major disaster or need to protect yourself against looting or, fires, whatever it might be, or I guess it's not going to help with fires. I meant hurricanes. Plywood, something that always sells out in the South. Whenever there's a hurricane, plywood sells out right away. You should have plywood for all your windows if you live in an accident-prone place like that, and filters for your, fans if you live in a fire-prone place. This is all just to give people some tips that might help them survive. I want people to be comfortable. We all want to be comfortable. By the way, if you get plywood, don't forget to get the screws. That's one of the things you gotta get. Not nails, screws. A lot of people don't have a generator. I think it's very important to have a generator. But beyond that, there's a couple things that I think it's kind of silly that people overlook. But in the modern day, we can download books and manuals, survival books, everything. I have it's something I downloaded as a torrent file several years ago. It's 230 plus survival books is what it was. And it was like this whole load of downloaded and copied survival books. Sure, I took it right off the torrent site, didn't pay for it, whatever, bust me. But I loaded that thing up on my Kindle at the time, years ago. Right now I have it on a few different SD cards and hard drives. It is a whole shitload of books, everything, how to build anything you want. But, of course, people will say, well, you have to be able to read it, you have to have a device, of course, but there will always be a way. But if there aren't, I still have a huge book about camping and wilderness survival, tips and tricks. I even have my Cub Scout book. I still believe in the man's man and the needs for that. In the current society, we don't see the need for the man's man. I get that. But we will again, okay? Like, when I went out in my yard the other day and there was a raccoon attacking my dog and vice versa, it takes a man to grab a fucking net and bag that fucker up. I don't mean a woman can't do it. Don't get me wrong. What I'm saying is that a lot of us men don't do these things anymore because we are so just stuck in this bullshit world of, going to work, coming home, everything's comfortable, no big deal. It's part of the reason why I want to buy some land and get out there. And be able to walk out on my back porch and worry about wildlife again, right? Or, not that I would, but you know what I mean. To finish this out, I'm rambling here, but a first aid kit, a good one. I have a stapler up here for wounds, like suturing wounds. You can get them on Amazon right now, and I hate Amazon, of course, but I wanted to buy it just in case, and I got one for I think $10, and it's a stapler that's loaded with staples. It's a skin stapler. So you pull the wound shut and you literally staple it. It pulls the staple through. It sounds gross, but if somebody's bleeding to death, you might need that. And they're extremely cheap right now. But, you can buy medical supplies right now, scissors and wound closures and things that, like stitches, things like that. You can buy that stuff. A lot of people don't want to buy it because, I don't know, it's kind of morbid. Like, I'll just go to a doctor. But you've got to realize there might not be a damn doctor around to help you. And I've heard people say things like, well, if things get really bad and there's an earthquake or there's a disaster, I'll just wait for FEMA to come save me or the government. I've literally heard this from people I know. Like, they're not going to come save you if everyone else is dying. We've seen this over and over and over. So being able to protect yourself isn't just something that's a right or an option. It's something that's an obligation. If you're an individual You can do whatever you want. But if you have children, you should be prepared for these things. Because I consider it would be just negligent for a parent not to be prepared to take care of their kids in an emergency. And I am a parent, so I have to do these things. Having a map is crucial of your local area and knowing your local routes. In other words, have a plan of where you're going to go if something happens. In my head, I know exactly where I'm heading if something gets bad here, but the thing is, be able to stand your ground if you can. Know, this is the final one, know your local food distributors. Know where your food distributors are, not the grocery stores. If the grocery stores sell out, you still have these hubs, these places where all the food is sent from. My son worked at one last year. That would be the first place I would go. Huge warehouse just loaded with fresh food. You might have to get nasty and but I think that most people would cooperate and work together. It's not like they're going to have a huge security force, and I hate to say it, but people would need to get their own food, whatever it takes. And the most important thing and the final thing is to build trust in your community. No matter what happens, no matter how prepared you are, no matter how much ammo you've got or how much food you've got, you're going to need to know your neighbors. And if something really does happen where you need to hunker down for several months or longer, it could be a huge issue that might never be resolved completely. This country could fall apart pretty easily. I've heard people say that, it'll never happen. It's always going to be a local thing. But, with all the attacks that have been going on lately, people should be paying attention. I'm talking about like cyber attacks. It doesn't take much to bring down a grid when we depend so much on everything working together. So be ready, be prepared for anything that might happen, but don't worry about it. Go on with your life, do your thing, and have the shit you need to survive. Thanks for listening. I'm out. This has become longer than I anticipated as usual, and I'll talk to you all next time. Be well. Thank you. Thanks to my patrons. Thanks to my peeps. And I'll talk to you later.